that, he said, although it is a challenge, it also creates an opportunity. It compels our regions to really think, forcibly think about it. And SDG framework provides that opportunity of regional cooperation. And I think there is strength in that, because basically the sharp inequality and the low level of deprivation, which are commonly shared, although there are sharp inequalities within the South and within the South Asian countries, within the global South, but still this offers an opportunity and compulsion for acting. The cost of inaction is very high, as has been estimated by some of the studies in the social sector. I just wanted to show that over the past 15 years, South Asian countries have grown at a highly disparate rate. The inequalities has gone up over time. Now, I have been discussing this issue with my colleague Milindo Chakraborty and Professor Sachin Chaturvedi. Within the framework of South-South cooperation, we talk about solidarity. We talk about non-intervention, sovereignty of the countries, equality. And that certainly remains the basic framework. But, you know, when all the countries are at the same level of economic and social development, the benefits of a project get more or less distributed equally, or if one project benefits one country, the other project benefit the other one. So you don't do benefit cost analysis in South-South cooperation on project basis. But when the inequalities are sharp, I think these issues have come up and the discontent do figure out, and it is more important to quantify to the extent this is possible, and that's how the think tank and the research institution would have to come forward and really take up this challenge. Having said that, I would like to say, as far as the issues of health and education are concerned, the deprivation in terms of gender is concerned, the empowerment, skill development is concerned, I have a feeling that the areas of conflict that was discussed in the first and the second session in terms of trade and investment, I think in the areas of social development, health and education, such areas of conflict are likely to be less important. Because if you improve in reducing mortality rate, child mortality, maternal mortality, improve the skill levels, and I think that would not benefit only that country in the South, but also the neighboring countries and overall global South. So I personally am very hopeful that the regional cooperation within the global South, in particular I'm talking about South Asian countries, have a future, have a prospect. I just wanted to find out how the network of think tanks should function, because again, in the context of trade and investment, it was pointed out that the SDGs are not translated at the programmatic level. They are not translated at the district level. At the state level also, the translation is often missing. So I think the role of the research institutions and the civil society organizations would be extremely important to map this gap. If you have talked about the factor of political economy coming in, and our colleague from Bangladesh did mention that in terms of trade, trade in food items, there are restrictions which come up, the political economy factors come up, which create tensions. But I have a feeling that if there is this gap, deficit which exists, information gap deficit exists, that is taken up to the project level, I think these tensions can be certainly met. I would therefore suggest, certainly the overall way forward has been proposed by Professor Bhattacharya, we can discuss that, but as a person coming from the statistics background, I would suggest 2 or 3 things. Can we prepare a map of these think tank organizations based on the region of their activities, the sector of their activities, the year when they have started, and in the context of India, as I mentioned, that we have 1 year, we have collected this information, even including what are the policy interventions they have made. I think that would be the starting point for moving forward in the path suggested by Professor Bhattacharya, and we can certainly discuss that, but we need to strengthen that with information base. The first job would be really to prepare a matrix of the data for the network of institutions, classify them in terms of, as I said, nature of activities and areas of intervention. And often we do find a large number of institutions which are really the think tank institutions doing global networking are supported by some global organization, sometimes by UN organization. This has an advantage because they are permanent in a way, and they would be having their presence for certain years. But questions are raised that does that support system which comes from that organization changes the lens of looking at the South Asian reality? That's a point that we have to interpret, as Professor Bhattacharya was saying, SDG in the Asian context. Some of the more permanent organizations which are doing this networking across the countries and also within the country are certainly those which are supported either by the global institutions or national institutions. So that is one thing that needs to be analyzed. Second, those which are functioning on the basis of the projects. In fact, as a part of Jawaharlal Nehru University, I got a project from FAO and I established a network with Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Thailand, and Malaysia on food security, building the database, poverty level, calorie deficits, classifying by regional groups, social groups. But unfortunately, that kind of an initiative doesn't have permanency. Because the day I left the institution, that network ceases to exist. And that's what happens whenever you have the institutions which are really depending on project support, they don't have that kind of permanency. So what do you do about that? And also, when you have a massive grant, even if you are an independent think tank, if you have a massive grant from one and a big organization, you have to worry about the lens. And the third point, and that's where I will conclude, is a large number of initiatives I would like to tell you, since I work with the civil society organizations also at the grassroots level. They're not recognized, but they are working. I know Slum Dwellers Foundation in Mumbai, they are doing network all over Asia and also some of the Latin American countries and African countries. I know similar organizations, you know, CBGA, they are doing some kind of a budgeting. And I remember with Mr. Ponna Vignaraja, we tried to do something with, as a part of United Nations University, monitoring poverty programs across South Asian countries. The poverty data and whatever programs and change, activities are launched by different government, we must monitor and comment on them. But again, as I said, that some of such initiatives at the grassroots level, we don't even know about them. And I think there's a lot of contribution they are making in terms of increasing the understanding. They may not have permanency, but they may be based on individual relationship with a country or with a research institution. But we need to know them, and perhaps we should create an environment that such activities and such organizations and such networks are also strengthened. That's some of the suggestions that came to my mind. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Professor Kundu, for extremely substantive intervention and very useful intervention. I would say your idea of mapping think tanks is extremely important, and some of us who are part of management of different think tanks know pretty well how some of the Western agencies have intervened and have taken upon themselves this idea of ranking think tanks, and they approach for all different reasons of ranking of think tanks. The other important point that I learned from this intervention, Professor Kundu, is also the fact that how people outside our region have intervened in terms of escalating differences more then we ourselves taking control of the things, and that I think is also evident even within SDG debates. There are more divisive approaches among developing countries, among the regional leaders, within societies and within countries. And one example we saw yesterday, and I did comment upon it. So I think we need to consolidate our understanding. There might be differences. I don't say even in families people have differences. But the external actors, external agencies on name of helping us if are escalating our differences and drifting us apart from each other, I think we need to be mindful of that, and we need to create much greater awareness, as Dr. P.K. Anand mentioned, in context of food security, but even at the larger level, we require this awareness. Now, let me turn to Nazir Bhai. We look forward hearing from you, Mr. Nazir Kabiri, Senior Advisor to the Ministry of Finance. We have been looking forward for meaningful partnership with the think tank, but for us, as of now, you represent a good participation from Afghanistan.
Thank you. I'm privileged to be here amongst prominent faces representing think tanks. You yourself, of course, Chaudhry Saab, and the rest of our colleagues from CPD, of course. I have been busy as a development practitioner in Afghanistan for a couple of years now. I don't know how I got myself into this South Asia Economic Forum in Dhaka a couple of years ago, and then I was perhaps discovered by a group of think tanks here in the region, and I have been luckily interacting. Right. Well, I have been overappreciated perhaps for some of the contribution, and that also credit goes to Afghanistan as a laboratory of different practices for the last 17 years by a large group of international community, not only on the military front with their blood, but also on the development front. A tremendous example of cooperation of civilization, 40 plus international members of international community trying to help us out with the development agenda and building institutions. But again, this has been a fascinating journey. This coming to India, of course, as a hub, as a dynamic hub for thinking and brainstorming, brings on my academic side. And for that, you also have to excuse me for my lack of credentials in many of these specialized subjects. Dr. Bhattacharya from CPD, of course, exhausted this subject of on your questions of in terms of the modalities and the nature of the network, responding to your inquiries in a beautiful manner, which was supported by Chaudhry Saab. As a practitioner, we have been also participating in a number of other forums in this region sponsored by other development partners. One thing that came across strongly by a number of other prominent businessmen and civil society representatives and former politicians from South Asia and a different grouping called the South Asia Champions Process. And that was that if anything, South Asia is very much rich in terms of having a lot of institutions. There's no lack of institutions in this region, and there are so many of them, including one being SARC. So formalities and institutions and bureaucracies and structures are all in place. The impediment, of course, for us not picking up as a region, of course, is of a political nature. And it's a different story that we all have experienced in our understanding in our own respective countries. Beyond that, Afghanistan, as I said, is now a member of the SARC community, and at the same time, our heavy plate last 17 years didn't let us think much on the development thinking as the specialized think tanks here do. We have a number of prominent security-focused and diplomacy-focused think tanks. We neglected that to nourish and develop some of institutions similar to ones here in South Asia, specializing in development policies and research. But if this is something that brings us back to South Asia, I will be very happy and humbled to present you one from Afghanistan. Yeah, I have been in the government for a number of years now. I'm already thinking about this idea of putting together a development think tank. A development think tank to bridge this Central Asian mindset with the South Asian type of forward-looking agendas. We are very much delighted to be here. This is not the quality of the discussions we get back in Central Asia, provided the type of regimes in our neighborhood, the communities, language barriers, and the rest. I believe this community serves as a laboratory for us, and we support and buy into it. Historically, we have been traders. If you count into the quality of our thinkings, if you want us to think together, then we are happy to be thinking with you and thinking with the region. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Thanks, Nazir Kabiri. I now turn to Professor Poshraj Pandey from Soti, Nepal. In Kathmandu, he is one of the most vibrant voices and has been very actively supporting all efforts